Hello, hi, what's up? It's me, Karen, your favorite booktuber, and I'm here to do my September reading wrap-up. In the month of September, I did not read as much as I would have liked because I was traveling in the beginning of the month and the end of the month, but it's okay. The first book that I read and finished was The Princess of 72nd Street by Elaine Kraf. I started this on my birthday, September 3rd. Keep it in mind for next year. And the reason I read this first was because I really liked the colors on the cover, and I was like, this will start off my new reading year quite well. I don't know. This is the story of our main character. Her name is Elaine, but she's also known as Princess Esmeralda because throughout this novel, what we're kind of looking at are her moments of radiance, which are her word for when she is experiencing an episode, a sort of madness. And during that time, she becomes Princess Esmeralda, and she is reigning over her country, her land, the 72nd Street, and she feels that when she is, acting as royalty, she must check in on the denizens of her street and see that everything is going well, that their businesses are flourishing, that the right kind of people are living there. And it's quite, on one hand, the tone is really light and fun and very sarcastic and silly, but there's this undercurrent of violence because when the narrator is experiencing these radiances, it's hard to talk about. She gets taken advantage of quite a bit by men, and there's some violence that occurs, and it's quite upsetting to read. And she's kind of questioning why did that happen? What's going on? But also when she's having these radiances, she's experiencing so much love and joy and beauty that she doesn't want them to end. And it's one of those things where she's just like, when I am radiant, she feels so much love, but when I'm not radiant, those are the times when I'm actually feeling homicidal, and supposedly in those times I'm sane. And I think that this reminds me quite a bit of Melina. It also reminds me of Strangers to Ourselves. And spoiler, in the month of October so far, I've read Paradise Logic by Sophia Kemp. There's a correlation there that I'm seeing. But what's fun about this book is obviously the tone, but there is this kind of just really strong, almost feminist reading. And it reminds me of the film that I watched on Unmarried Women, because towards the end of that film, the protagonist once again finds herself in love and contemplating what that would look for her. And something similar happens here, where it's almost as if because both of these works of art came out in the 70s, it's almost as if the women are unable to really self-actualize unless they have a partner. And so that's something for us to look at and wonder, what would it be like if she could experience a full independence and a full life without a man. What else did I want to talk about? I want to read one section because I do think there's so much for me to talk about with this book. I don't know, maybe I should do a specific newsletter on it, but I don't know. I did want to read this one section. I think it will give you an understanding of some of the tone. This is on page 45. Alan was your usual man in many ways, with the inevitable Catch-22, Portnoy's Complaint, The Naked Lunch, The Alexandria Quartet, Lolita, Shogun, The French Lieutenant's Woman, and Masters and Johnson's research books on his shelves. He also had a subscription to the New York City Opera and a collection of Baroque records. This is the type of man I usually don't get along with, but I try to keep an open mind. Alan was intelligent and seemed kind. In my last hospital, Radiant 6, I was told to associate with kind men. However, these are difficult to recognize or to find, particularly among the employed. Many unemployed men are exceedingly sensitive and kind, although they spend the days wandering through city parks and seeing free films in the museums. Alan seemed both kind and employed. There was a definite attraction between Alan and myself right there at the counter, and he paid for my coffee, which some women would object to as a form of patronization, but which I thought was polite and appropriate, never having been brainwashed. Our relationship progressed in time. Alan was consistent, which is a rare attribute in a man, as is punctuality. He would be romantic and even had a few ideas all his own. Yeah, this is this book. There was something else that I wanted to mention here, but I forgot, so that's it. So then after that, I read on a nonfiction book, which I mentioned in my women's biography video, and that book was Cleopatra's Daughter, From Roman Prisoner to African Queen. So if you don't know, Cleopatra had 4 children. Of those, only one reached to adulthood, and once, the Cleopatra fell and the empire was taken by Rome, her children were brought to Rome where they were raised within, I think, Octavian's like family. And we're learning a little bit about what it would have been like to have been educated as a child of Roman aristocracy, what was expected of her. And then when she was of age to wed, she married Yuba II, who kind of was in a similar position to her. They went back to Africa and they raised, well, they also had kids, but what I mean to say is that they ruled quite well, I think almost for 20 years. And her husband and her had a really great partnership, and you're seeing the ways in which they wielded power, what it would have been like for her to return to the continent. And I thought it was a really interesting read, and this isn't a knock on the author, this is just, she points out as well, there's so much we don't know because most scholars and historians for so much of history weren't giving women their due attention. And the author then towards the end of it is kind of like, it is most likely possible and most likely plausible that Queen Selene was interacting with other queens and of the ancient world, and that they were probably engaged in so many different kinds of correspondence, but we just don't know all of this stuff because of just history, and it's horrible. And I thought it was a really interesting read, but it's quite short, and there's just so many gaps in our knowledge. That's kind of what I have to say about that. Okay, the next book that I read was The Stepdaughter by Caroline Blackwood. This is a recent McNally's re-edition. This is my second Caroline Blackwood book. I read, what was the name of that book? So the book that I read the month prior was Granny Webster, which was this really slim, really cutting language, very good. And then this is even better. I loved this. I thought this was absolutely phenomenal. This is the story of this woman whose husband has left her, and he's gone off to Paris with his new wife, or like mistress, whatever it may be, but he's left behind his stepdaughter. And the stepdaughter is kind of a very flat character, and there's a reason for that as we find out more. But the stepdaughter really annoys the protagonist, and so she spends her days locked up in her beautiful apartment on the like Upper West Side or whatever, and she's just consumed by her annoyances. And so she stopped talking to basically all of her friends, and in her head she writes letters to an unknown person, and she will just sign off each letter with the most ridiculous thing. And it's just so funny, like just so, once again, phenomenal writing. It's so short and like really just packs a punch, because at the end of it, at least for me, I read it and I was like, I understand this protagonist so much. Like I see what it is bothering them. And I thought what was interesting also is that there is this way that because the narrator is up above looking down at everything, she's so disconnected from it all. She's disconnected from real people, from actual problems. Not to say that she doesn't have a problem, she does have a problem, but she's just so out of touch. And there's a way in which, because her apartment is up in the sky and just so beautiful and airy, that she's able to be divorced from it. And I just thought that was a phenomenal thing, the way that small little like detail adds so much color to her, and also the way in which we look at this book, and is also a reflection almost on class, because there is something that at one point the narrator is so just devoid of her emotions that she starts reading news articles, but she's only looking at the news articles to find like really gritty, like bad news in order to shock her system and to finally feel something. And I think by the end of it, you're just like, I loved it. I think I want to reread it. I thought it was so great. This is on page 40. Martha Weller is my best friend in New York, and I have offended her by making excuse after excuse to not see her. She has become militantly feminist lately, and I feel frightened of the harsh, clear way she would appraise my situation. By trying to build me up a new confidence in myself as a woman, she might try to tear away what little shreds I still retain. To make me face the future, she would feel obliged to destroy my past, which is all that this moment that I feel I possess. Yeah, I'm not doing this book justice, but you need to run out and get this. I think this is my favorite book that I read all month, and the book ends with her final letter, and her sign off is "Yours miserably, Jay." I don't know. I just think it was so perfect. It's just like very sly and sarcastic and so good. Would recommend. The next book that I read was a book that was a little bit of a disappointment, but it's okay. This was The Lives of Lucian Freud, The Restless Years, 1922 to 1968. Now, this biography is Volume 1, Volume 2. I read Volume 1, and I will read Volume 2, even though on many regards I didn't love Volume 1. So Lucian Freud is the painter who had, and also the grandson of Freud. And the author of this book was also really good friends with Lucian Freud, and so it's not the best biography in the sense that it is objective entirely. I do think that there's a lot of repetition, and it's almost like he loves his pal Lucian, but we do get a picture of Lucian that is very bad. Like, Lucian Freud was not the best of people, but it's okay. How many of us really are? And so interjected throughout the book are Lucian Freud's own comments. So it really feels like he's just there with you the whole time, giving anecdotes and just piping in every 2 minutes, every paragraph to say something. And I don't think that entirely makes for the best biography experience. But you do also have to appreciate how candid Lucian Freud is about his life and how he doesn't really express remorse for some of the things that he's done. And this man had so many kids and was really just fucking around. But he just lays it all out on the table, and it's up to the reader to make the decision. There is a lot of repetition in this book, way too much. But I think what's interesting is that you see that this chapter of his life, because the author takes us from birth till about the time that he's 40, and these really were his restless years, and he's just traveling, he's trying to get into art. On some regards, when there were moments of art criticism, it was really quite good. I wish we got more of that. We were seeing the ways in which Lucian Freud was a child who didn't like rules, would kind of do whatever he wanted, was not the best scholar. He would skip class to go ride horses, and then just found himself stumbling into art. And it's interesting to see also that his father wanted to be an artist but decided not to, and then the son picked that up and ran with it. And there's an interesting relationship with the mother. He, for some reason, seems to really despise her, but she loves him quite a bit. And he also didn't really get along very well with his two brothers. And he's, has his first marriage to Kitty, who comes from a Bohemian family. And then after Kitty, he marries Caroline Blackwood and is able to enter into the world of the British aristocracy. And this opens him up to other characters, and we're learning a bit more about some of his patrons and his friendship with Francis Bacon. And it kind of made me want to read a biography on Francis Bacon, but yeah, there's a lot to be learning. And I don't know, I did really enjoy it. And I think there was also the Lucian Freud also at one point goes to Greece, and that his time in Greece somehow inspired me. And I don't know, I just think that though this book isn't for everyone, is quite boring, repetitive, but also really interesting. I don't know, I did like it, but also I don't think most people will. And I will read book 2, maybe before the year ends, just to wrap up my Lucian Freud reading. I do want to read a biography on Caroline Blackwood. I do think it once come out, or a few years ago. It was called Dangerous Muses. So that's on the docket. I liked reading about her because when Lucian Freud and Caroline Blackwood were together, she wasn't an author at that point, but she was reading a lot. And so the way that he was able to paint her was she would just read a book and just be lying in bed and he would paint her, and it worked quite well. But yeah, there is something here in the ways in which I would have loved to have read more about his muses. I think that there's a way that another book, so many books could probably be written about him, but one that centers his art around the muses, the various muses that he had. I think that would have been a really interesting read for me, but we don't have a book like that out just yet. Or probably, I don't know if we ever will, or if we will in my lifetime. Anyways, then I read another book on audiobook. This is The Secret History of the Mongol Queens, How the Daughters of Genghis Khan Rescued His Empire. Phenomenal book. So good. I was really in it. This is by Jack Weatherford, and he wrote initially a book specifically on Genghis Khan. And so I did read a few reviews where people were kind of just like, that first book completely ignored the women in his life, but the second one gives so much emphasis to him that it's a bit of a whiplash, but I only read this one and I thought it was great. So basically, Genghis Khan, Mongol Empire, expands it majorly, and you know, we start with learning a lot about his background and how he also kind of didn't really become Genghis Khan until probably middle age, like in his 40s, and we learn a lot about Mongol customs and this idea of how, I think it was the sky is female. Let me double check this. Oh, I had that wrong. Okay, so the land is considered female, but the sky is considered male. And Genghis Khan was kind of operating under the presumption that both of these things should be equal and that you need to balance both of those. And so in his empire, in order to do that, he was the male and he relied on his female daughters to help bolster the country and to keep it running, because there was also this like Mongol custom of how 8 wheels or 9 wheels or something, I don't know, 8 or 9 is a very good number. Maybe it was 9 because he had 8 daughters and then he was the 9th. So he was the center, and around him he used the women in his life, his daughters and daughter-in-laws, to help grow and keep the country running. And so you're seeing the ways in which he made that possible. When he would get his children married, he would give speeches, and the women were given so much more power than the men were. But then you see that when he dies, there's such a huge backlash. And you could say the same thing happens in like ancient Egypt when you have Hatshepsut and the book that I read on ancient Egyptian queens, and the ways in which once there was a really just a female in power, the ways in which the next ruler tried to decimate anything they ever did and tried to eradicate women's power and reach. And you see the same thing happen here, that once Genghis Khan dies, the women's power starts to splinter because the men around them don't like it, and they start to put roadblocks up in place. But then we track, I don't know, maybe like 200 years of history afterwards to see the ways in which the Mongol Empire continues, and that it ends with this very like hopeful final queen who becomes a bit of a mythic character towards the end, but really just so interesting. And I was then able to see what's interesting, because this then brings me off to my reading that I'm doing right now. I'm reading a book on the Romanovs, and there's the first 2 or 3 Tsars of the Romanov Empire were crowned with Mongol headdresses. So it's just so great to see the ways in which, you know, I read about Mongols, and then now that reading, it's just adds color to what I'm currently reading just by, I don't know, I like it. I love seeing these connections. Okay, the next thing that I read was this collection of short stories that the publisher sent to me. These are some notes that I wrote. Okay, so this is Mouth by Puloma Ghosh. These stories I think would be perfect for people who like to do like spooky reading or whatever it is. Like October is a great time to read these stories because they're kind of eerie and there's this almost fantasy element to them. It reminded me of the author Anne Yu and her writing Braised Pork and Ghost Music. The stories are, I don't know if I used this word yet, but they're very eerie. There's like a kind of vampire like character at one point. There's almost just these otherworldly characters and these elements of magic that are hard to explain. But there's also the way in which we're looking a lot at mother-daughter relationships and contemplating aloneness. There's a lot about being alone. These characters do feel very isolated and separate and just on their own in whatever environment in which they are in. It's I don't know if I mentioned short stories. I know those aren't for everyone, but I thought that this was just a really good palate cleanser within what I was reading, and was like exactly what I needed. Okay, after that I read a book that I found at the big Barnes & Noble in New York, because, well, I was doing this thing where I was like going to the Strand and then I went to the Barnes & Noble and then I went back to the Strand, but whatever, because I was looking for more Caroline Blackwood books. But while I was in Barnes & Noble, it was like, there's lots of shelves in this particular Barnes & Noble. It's quite big, and my eyes were immediately drawn to this book on the shelf, and I pulled it out, and it's called The Murderess by, I'm not even going to bother to pronounce this author's name, but this is by a Greek author, and I took it as a sign because I was contemplating whether or not I should go to Athens after Paris, and I did end up going, and I also took it as another sign because Lucian Freud spent a lot of time in Greece, and it was just like, you have to, I don't know, I was just seeing signs everywhere. So I read this book, and this is really slim also, and it's, you don't know, the story of a murderess, if you couldn't figure that one out. What's interesting is that it's like the what is it called? The foreword of the book talks about how this is like an extended short story, and it really is. The author is someone who was quite religious, but this book isn't necessarily very religious per se. There is an element of religion that pops up, but religion is not the salvation found in this book. It is just there, which is a really interesting thing for the author to do. But basically, this is a story of a woman who's in her 60s. She has had her children. She's now had a couple of grandkids, and her daughter has given birth, and she's holding the baby, and she just thinks like, another girl. It's another girl, and isn't that just, it is horrible to be a girl and to experience life as a woman, and all the violences and the injustices that one faces, and she just is overcome by a moment of madness, which continues throughout the book. And I had a really funny joke, but I've completely forgotten it. I was thinking about it yesterday. Anyways, yeah, it's a really interesting book. Yeah, I kind of want to read the last sentence to you, but I won't. Okay, after that, I read another McNally's book. This is Rhine Journey by Schlee. This book came out in the 80s, but it is historical fiction about the Victorian era. This tells the story of a protagonist whose name I have forgotten. Charlotte. Okay, so Charlotte's on holiday with her brother, who's very religious, her sister-in-law, who's really passive-aggressive and just prone to suffering, and like has the only person who's ever experienced pain and the only one who ever really knows truly what pain could be like, and don't, you know, don't disrupt her nerves. And then there's the niece who's just naive and nice, whatever. And so they're on holiday going through Germany, and they're on like this group trip kind of, because there's opportunities where they encounter other people, and one of the people that she encounters is this man who looks like the man she fell in love with when she was like 18 years old but was unable to marry, and how that this guy showing up looking so much like him sets her off on this sort of internal just journey of questioning and feeling. And it's really interesting. This book is very psychological in the ways in which there are so many moments where you know, like when you have a crush on someone or something like that, you can create fantasies and scenarios in your head, and like that's what's happening here. And I thought that was quite phenomenal, and you'll see the ways in which those scenes enable the protagonist to ask questions and to question herself and to question like him, and to usher her along on this journey and this change. And it's a lot about female agency, and you're also looking at the ways in which your family can kind of ruin your life, because you have a role that you're expected to play and expectations placed upon you by your family. And it's just, will you let them, you know, take you through life on a certain path that probably gives you no joy, or will you be brave and do something different? Actually, I think I said earlier that The Stepdaughter was my best read of the month. I would have to say that it's actually these two books, The Stepdaughter and Rhine Journey. And this is so great to say because I've read a lot of McNally editions, and I'm going to read all of them, yeah? But there's some that I read that are like so great, and then there's others which are just, oh, okay. These two are both so great, but in different ways. I think, I don't know if necessarily everyone will like this book, because they might be like, oh, the protagonist is a bitch. Like, maybe. But I really saw myself in this. And then this one is also quite good, but it's a little bit more slow, slightly slower in pace. It takes place in like over a week, but so good. And I think also what was so great is the ways in which the author shows those like familial relationships so well, and the ways in which you can say something and enact a tiny bit of violence. There's one, I think, there's one time where the protagonist Charlotte says something to her brother, and it's like quotation marks, whatever her line is, and it ends with, she had her revenge. And it's like shows those small family moments really well. Yeah, so those were those two books. But the final book that I read was a nonfiction book called When Women Ran Fifth Avenue, A New Glamour and Power of the Dawn of American Fashion. So this was a really interesting book because, well, for me, I don't know if it will be for you. It tells the story of three women who were like, some of them fell into it, some of them really wanted it, but became people of power within Fifth Avenue and played a role in shaping American fashion and the retail landscape. I wrote the names of the three women because I don't want to forget. Okay, so we have Hortense Odlum of Bonwit Teller, Dorothy Shaver of Lord and Taylor, and Geraldine Stotts of Henry Bendel. I might have like mispronounced those names ever so slightly because my handwriting is a little messy, but you get the idea. And so this book is looking at the retail landscape, which is a huge interest of mine, women in work, and it shows how these women came into power and what they did to play a role within department stores. So Odlum of Bonwit Teller was a woman who was married to this financial bigwig guy who was basically starts an affair and wanted to get his wife to spend less time paying attention to him. So he was like, has this department store that he had bought during the Depression and is like, you know what, you're a woman, you know how to shop, like, I need your opinion. And so she falls into this job. She did not want to work. She basically, though, was very successful during her tenure there. She worked for 6 or 7 years and really helped grow the company, but then steps away and sees her family life disintegrate. Her marriage falls apart. Her children, one of them ends up falling into heavy alcoholism. She kind of doesn't have a relationship with the second one. She spends the rest of her life hating the fact that she was a career woman and blaming the disintegration of her family on being a career woman. And then Dorothy Shaver was a woman who you also learn a little bit about her sister, how they came to New York City and fell into, started this doll company. And then through there, she ends up working at Lord & Taylor. And you see how sorry, something's going off, whatever. I'll try to wrap it up quick. But how she ends up working there and devotes her life to it and just has a really great life that she never finds love, which is okay. Not everyone needs to, right? But then you have the third character, Geraldine Stotts of Henry Bendel, and it's really interesting because she runs the company for so long as if it is her company, even though she has no stake in it, but then she ends up buying the company and that kind of changes her relationship to it. And yeah, really phenomenal reading. Then the book ends and the author is, and her afterward is talking about how she kind of read this book because, I don't know, pandemic life and working, and I don't know, I didn't like the afterword that she gave. I thought we didn't need that because for me, I found this to be most interesting to look at women working in the retail space, but for her, it was, I don't know. I'm not rambling per se, but I'm not doing a good job explaining what I want to say, and it doesn't matter. We don't need to. We also got the anecdote about when Salvador Dali was working at, I think it was Lord & Taylor maybe, who was creating, or Henry Bendel, probably Henry Bendel. He was making the window display and he didn't like that they changed it, so he like breaks the mirror and falls onto the street. I don't know, lots of really great anecdotes. I thought this was a really interesting read for me. So yeah, that was my month of reading. That's life, that's how it goes. Yeah, I don't know. I think I haven't been reading as much fiction as I would like, and I kind of want to change that. I'm thinking of becoming a little bit more strict on my reading, and because I was reading this girl's Substack, and she talked about how she decides what she's going to read in a way, like she creates basically a TBR, but is really like each book needs to fit within a certain category, and I was thinking of maybe implementing that because I do think that I'm reading some interesting stuff, yes, and learning a lot for sure, but I don't know if I'm finding deriving as much pleasure as I would like from my fiction reading. Anyways, I've been talking a lot. My voice is starting to hurt. I will talk to you guys later. Bye.